Let me see if it's working. Oh. Hi. Let's see if it's working. We should be live. Yes, we are live. Hi. Welcome to our Empire Watch Cuba special after the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on January 3rd. Hi.
I can, wow.
Sorry. I can hear myself. We're just going to reset and start again. So, welcome to our Empire Watch Cuba special. This is part one of our special with the Assata Shakur Brigade. I'm very excited to have two people from that. I guess we would call them an organization here with us today to help us all figure out what we need to be doing for Cuba. But let me just start with my intro again. So, as we all know, or we should know, after the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on January 3rd, 2026, Venezuela's oil supply chain was effectively taken over, cutting off Cuba's main source of fuel. Soon after, President Trump threatened tariffs on any country that sells oil to Cuba. As a result, no oil has reached Cuba since January 9th, 2026, except for a single Russian tanker that arrived on March 30th. So today, in part one of our two-part series with the Assata Shakur Brigade, we'll be discussing what meaningful solidarity with Cuba looks like in this moment and what actions people around the world can take to stand with the Cuban people. The Assata Shakur Brigade, which I don't know why I'm finding it so hard to say, is an organization in revolutionary solidarity with Cuba based in Britain. It organizes delegation to Cuba that provide material support and contribute voluntary labor as part of the traditional solidarity bridges to with Cuba. The brigade is made up of a coalition of groups, including Codepink, Iskra Books, Black Liberation Alliance, and independent doctors, lawyers, and researchers. So, for more information, we have the link down below for the website, assatashakurbrigade.org. And joining us today for part one to discuss what we can do to help our special guests, Nuvpreet Carla, who I'm just going to let into. There you are. Hi, Nuvpreet. And Alexandro Zancan. Did I say your names correctly? Probably not, but welcome to Empire Watch. 50%. Welcome to Empire Watch, anyhow. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for all your work you've been doing on Cuba already and raising well about this. So,
Oh, thank you. And definitely right back at you. Much more so. Well, I'm just going to introduce you guys by your bio as well. Nuvpreet is part of the Assata Shakur Brigade. I actually just heard that you were one of the co-founders. If you want to talk about that more later, it'd be absolutely wonderful to hear how that came about. And she also works as digital content producer at Codepink, where she coordinates the Bases Off Cyprus campaign. Alexandra is a Marxist transdisciplinary artist, developer, and associate editor and graphic designer at Iskra Books, a member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee, and a member of the Assata Shakur Brigade. Welcome and hellos. Welcome and hellos. So usually I like to start like each interview sort of on a more personal note so that we can get to know our guests and stuff. So I guess like the most obvious question really is like what brought both of you guys into solidarity with Cuba? You know, were you ever indoctrinated with the anti-communist rhetoric surrounding Cuba? And if so, did you have like an aha moment, an awakening that made you care deeply about this struggle? Or will you just, tell me about how you got here? Also not too much pressure on one specific incident. I know not everyone has that, but it's always fun. Anyway, do you want to, who wants to start?
Do you want to go, Nuvpreet?
Yeah, sure, I can. Yeah, I feel like I don't actually have a great I don't have a great aha moment, unfortunately, but I feel like I wasn't so aware about Cuba growing up. But I always knew like the Buena Vista Social Club, because my parents would always play that. And I was lucky; I was like brought up in a left-wing family. My parents were communists, so while Cuba wasn't like the main part of their like political work, it was always there. So I was luckily not indoctrinated by them about Cuba, but of course we go to school, we grow up in like a imperialist society, which is, you know, the education system is a lot about indoctrination. Um, and so I feel like I remember best like in school when I was, you know, becoming more political, especially like as I learned about the Cold War in school, which I think is like one of the most famous times that you get like hammered with such like anti-communist propaganda. But I feel like the way that Cuba was presented was like this is just some like it's a relic of like the Soviet Union. It's like this like dangerous place that's near the United States. Or like otherwise maybe someone you know had like been to Cuba just as like a Caribbean holiday. Um, but of course like through all of this, I think we can see it actually as an indoctrination because you don't actually learn about Cuba. You don't learn about Cuba's history, Cuba's solidarity work. Um, and so it requires us to actually do all of the work, whereas we had like pushed with all of the like great, the greatest things that any of the imperialist countries have ever done. We never learn anything about Cuba. And so I think an awakening that I would see is when I learnt about Cuba's solidarity with the world, its health solidarity. Remember learning about like Operation Milagro or Miracle with the Cuba Venezuela joint campaign, which provided free eye care, free like eye surgeries to countries across Latin America, and like restored eyesight to millions of people in a short amount of time, which continues today, even though it's Cuban doctors are really under attack by the U.S. So I think learning about that, as well as learning about, oh, there actually was a country that supported national liberation struggles, struggles against colonialism, struggles against the anti-apartheid, struggles support for the struggles against apartheid in South Africa. Um, it's like there's you always want when you learn about history for there to have been a like a hero in this who actually was on your side, and then you realize there was, but it's just being like completely stopped from like either you knowing about it and also stopped from doing that solidarity work. So I think learning about that has like really gradually made me like want to know more about Cuba. And then I went to Cuba for the first time a couple of years ago, which was I think really my push into wanting to do more Cuba organizing and realizing that this is really an important place that you can hardly believe actually exists right now, and it's something that a lot more people need to do work about, especially right now when we have more news about Cuba. I think it's our responsibility to be acting in defense of the Cuban Revolution in solidarity with Cuba. And I think it requires people to have that awakening and then share it with other people so that we can, um, yeah, we can realize that this is a struggle for humanity. And so people who have interests in humanity and justice in the world should really be standing with Cuba.
Yeah, that's a really good, that's really well said. And it's so interesting, the idea about heroes in the world. You know, I meet there's so many comments and so many people that are like, there are no heroes in the world, you know, there are no, it's because all the heroes are erased from history because we're the bad guys. I mean, not us, but the global north, right? So it makes sense. But Ale, would you like to also tell us how you came about political orientation?
Yeah, so I grew up in a broadly left-wing family in Italy. It was never quite communist, but at least it was sympathetic to socialism. I never really experienced the massive anti-communist propaganda push that you see now in the West in general, in Britain, in the US. And you see it in Italy as well now, especially with the fascists in power. But it could be a matter of just maybe being too young and shielded to experience it fully. But I guess if we could talk about a specific moment of political awakening, so to speak, it'd probably be during the first COVID lockdown with the protests against the murder of George Floyd. Basically, that was when I came out of my bubble of complacency and actually started reading, studying, unlearning behaviors and notions, relearning basically everything I thought about the world. Um, and I guess that was consolidated when I picked up a copy of Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. And then that brought me to Lenin, State and Revolution, and then I didn't really look back from there. And the Cuban struggle, especially, I mean, it's the stuff of legend. 12 revolutionaries conducting guerrilla warfare, gradually gaining the support of the people, defying the greatest empire in the world, thriving in all these fields despite a genocidal blockade, weathering the fall of the USSR and the socialist bloc in general, playing a leading role in biomedical development and medicine in the world in general, creating the most advanced family and trans laws in the world. I mean, I could go on. And this is a country that's been blockaded for its whole existence. It's it's incredibly inspiring. So I don't actually understand how anyone on the left could not support Cuba. Actually, I see people on the right begrudgingly admit that it's, cool and that Che Guevara was actually a hero despite them not necessarily agreeing with the ideals. Like it's really hard not to like Cuba.
And it's also like such a small country. I mean, the population is what, 10 million or 12 million?
10, I think it's like 11.
Yeah, it's very small considering it's probably the size of London in terms of the population. To have such an incredible. Am I totally wrong about that? I think maybe or LA. LA has like 10 million. I mean, when you think about the incredible revolutionary history, but I mean, of course, two other countries that are demonized all the time is Russia and China. And coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, they're also the very few countries who have extended aid to Cuba. Can you just to sort of like get us positioned into what's currently happening here now in Cuba? What are the significance? What has been the significance of these actions from Russia and China? Slightly different types of humanitarian aid, and can you give us sort of an idea from? I know you have other comrades that have been to Cuba already. What is the current situation inside Cuba? How is the fuel crisis actually playing out on the ground, and basically the broader humanitarian impact? You're free. Maybe you can take that. We can just swap back and forth.
Sure. I think I can speak a bit to like the current situation in terms of I was there like this time last year or so, and already then the fuel crisis was intense. There are blackouts all the time, are rolling blackouts, both to preserve like the energy grid as well, and it's like this is nothing new. What we're seeing now, of course, this has been like a really significant escalation by the Trump administration, which is really seeking just to intensify the blockade, which we should really see as a genocidal blockade because the intention is to really suppress and subordinate people through causing mass suffering. And so I think when we look at right now the humanitarian impact, which is that it's even harder to access the items that were already impossible to get because they had to be carried by people. The loss of tourism, which has really been like on a decline since 2020, and only made harder now because of so much propaganda, and then also the jet fuel shortages. I think it's a really serious situation where you're seeing a country, an island that has extended so much solidarity to the world, um, be forced to be isolated because of U.S. blockade. Um, and now I think one of the ways that the main like fronts of attack by the U.S. is against the medical missions, which Cuba has been providing um, for decades. And so what we're seeing, I think, now is while in Cuba itself, there's just major shortages. People are finding it hard to get the very basic essentials for life, because this is a small island that, like other countries in the world, needs trade, and so like being cut off from that, but also being cut off from oil, so that they cannot actually develop self-sufficiency and industry. So they actually can't develop into a country that is then not so made so much a victim to U.S. attacks. This is the current moment, and of course the Nuestra America convoy went recently, and there was comrades who went really shared this report back that there is there's a deep crisis going on, but also at the same time, before the Russian oil shipment last week, there was a country that did not have oil enter it for 3 months, yet it survived. People survived. The revolution continued, and I think we also, while we see the humanitarian crisis, we also have to see the strength and resilience of the Cuban people and also the Cuban state in being able to provide for people. You think if any other country in the world, if most other countries in the world, let's say Britain, for example, didn't have a shipment of oil for 3 months, you couldn't imagine what would possibly happen. And so I think while we're seeing the impact of the fuel crisis, we also should look at the resilience of people, which they, when all of these international delegates came, they were extended the warmest hospitality and given so much support. And so I think while we're seeing this crisis, we're also seeing the continued ability of the Cuban people to survive, which I think is completely not what the United States thought would happen 66 years later.
Ale, could you talk a little bit more, on how the Cuban socialist system, maybe for people that might not be as familiar, i.e. myself, how it might differ from other socialist system countries like China, for example? Because I think Newpreet said something so important, that Cuba, if it was really under any other system than its current system, it would have collapsed decades ago, probably. I just did a report on the Philippines, and basically the Philippines has 45 days of oil, really, because it's a complete private oligarchy, and so it has no ability to withstand any sort of blockade. So yeah, Ale, could you sort of expand a little bit more on that? Sorry, I think I muted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, the remarkable thing about Cuba, and I guess this is actually a common thing with states like China, with socialist states in general, is the strength of its planned economy. So the reason Cuba can withstand an embargo the way it has, and yes, obviously there's going to be issues, it's physically impossible to bypass the lack of oil. They've done the best they could. They've initiated green energy programs, but not just recently. Even just before the fall of the USSR, Fidel Castro knew it was coming. He saw that the USSR was sending less and less shipments of oil. So basically the whole country initiated, what I would call a green revolution, really. But they started integrating renewable energy of all sorts into their national grid, and we see the effects of it now as well. It is specifically because of that forward-thinking, preventative kind of politics that Cuba, with the help of China, for example, was able to raise the share of its solar power in its overall electricity production from 5.8% to over 20% just in the last year. And I think that's, well, it's possible due to the fact that Cuba was, that Cuba was prepared for events like these, because it wouldn't be the first time that that oil has not arrived to the island, but also it was able to do so due to the nature of its solidarity, as in not so much in a quid pro quo way, but when you've spent the entirety of your country's existence sending brigades to help all the countries in the world, sending medical assistance everywhere, when hurricanes happen, when earthquakes happen, people will want to help you back. And also being a stalwart of anti-imperialism, that's why you get the support from Russia. That's why you get the support from China. It's, I think that's a huge part of it. It's the fact that they have a generous disposition that comes from being a staunchly socialist country with a planned economy that works for the people and not for profit.
Sorry, I was just saying, like, I think that's kind of a moving thing, but I think that should make anybody feel a little bit better about the world, maybe. There are, these sort of things happening. I mean, there's a long history of solidarity brigades serving as a bridge between Cuba and international movements, despite the over 60 years blockade, the longest blockade in history. Can you talk about where the Assata Shakur Brigade fits into that tradition, how it began, how you guys became involved, or in the case of New Freed, like how you actually had this idea and put it into action, and what your goals are today. And I'm going to just like pull up the website so people can see what it looks like. So, but go ahead, New Freed.
Website also was completely the artistic ability of Ali, so it's absolutely stunning. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that. Yeah, I think the long history of solidarity brigades, which I think also like we both touched on before, is something that is not like specific. Of course, there's no like the international delegations go to lots of different countries, but the nature that they take on in Cuba is very specific. And this started 10 years after the revolution in 1969 with basically a group of students in America who heard a call from Fidel, who was basically asking Cuban workers to come and help with the sugar harvest. And some of these like students, who I think a lot of them were involved in kind of other anti-war organizing, heard this call and like went to Cuba on what became one of the first ever brigades, and they went, and I doubt that the Cuban government was like very ready for all of these like American university students to come in, but they did help cut some sugarcane. I think famously Fidel was like, okay, yeah, you can cut some bits of it, I guess. But they went and volunteered this labor, and they also learned from the revolution, um, and that what became what is the Venceremos Brigade, which still exists today, which sends delegations every year. It's a tradition that is mainly of Americans going to Cuba, and this history is, yes, it's continued since then. There are delegations now from across the world that go to Cuba all the time, but particularly they go on May Day because it's marked by basically witness, Cuban workers come together and um, be celebrated by international delegations, and also then celebrate the revolution. And so, this history is one that everybody should really be a part of. I went on like I mentioned, I went to Cuba for the first time 2 years ago. I went just as kind of a tourist. I went on like a kind of revolutionary tour of like Latin America just because I wanted to see these places. But when I was there, like I was saying, it was like it's an incredibly moving experience, and I think you can learn so much about Cuba from reading about the feats of the revolution, reading about everything it's provided to the world. But there's another element to this, and that is the feeling of being there, the feeling of being like in a free society. And there's just so many examples that it's hard to really understand, but being in a place where there's no advertising, first of all, where commerce isn't what like governs your interactions, where you don't have like the fear and violence of private ownership. There's no loitering. You can just be, and people like are around. Like the provision of like basic services, seeing police who were there to serve people, not serve capital. There's like a lot of things that I think, while we go to Cuba because we want to go in our like solidarity and support, it really is a transformative experience for the people that go, and I think that is another important element to this. Um, but when I was there, for the first time, I met a lot of comrades who also really made me realize that Cuba is the revolution is of the people today. Like these are truly revolutionary people who are completely committed to it, despite what kind of imperialists want us to think, that it's like imposed on a people. Like these are the revolutionary people of the world, and you see this with millions of people turning out for May Day every year in Havana. So after that trip, I was like, okay, wow, this is actually a place that exists. incredible. I was like, I need to live here. Then I was like, okay, no, let me go on a brigade and see see what it's like to provide this kind of voluntary labor and support. So I went with the National Network on Cuba, which is a U.S. coalition. It's formed of lots of groups, and they do brigades and they do a lot of political organizing and trips. And if people in the U.S., I really implore you to get involved with them. They're doing a caravan right now, which from Michigan all the way to Florida, and then they're going to be traveling to Cuba from there. So I went with them for May Day last year, and that the form of the brigade is obviously very different from just going to Cuba as a tourist, because you get a sense of you meet comrades from across the world, you extend you extend your solidarity, but you gain so much more. And when I was there, and of course the process of learning, there was quite a lot of asks for more solidarity within Europe, but particularly in Britain. I think because while we're here, Britain doesn't support the blockade. They don't actually support they vote against it at the UN every year, but even still, they're not doing anything against it. They're not actively opposing the blockade. They're just kind of doing nothing in a way. And so I think and there's also the sense of given that there's not a lot of analysis of Britain's role in the US empire, or like recognizing it as an Anglo-American empire, though I think with like Starmer's complete wholehearted attacks on Iran, hopefully that will change in people's analysis. But I think that there is like a lack of anti-imperialist organizing in Britain, and that is the natural outcome of going to Cuba, as you realize that our struggle is one. Every single thing we see in our society, everything we see globally, injustice amounts to one struggle against imperialism, and we should see Britain's role in that. And so I thought, there is this call from Cuba for us to extend solidarity work, to broaden this work. I think, like Ali said before, it's surprising that so many people on the left, particularly in Britain, aren't aware of Cuba, or if they are aware, they're not engaged in actual organizing, when this is really a struggle that really should be at the heart of everybody in the world. And so I thought, there's an impetus to do something. Why not organize our own brigade to go? And so now here we are. We have a few dozen people going. We've raised already over £12,000 for medical supplies. We've been holding events that have also aimed at doing political education and raising money. And I think that, given the urgency of this time right now and the serious escalation, there's also a lot more interest in going. Many people who will be going are going for the first time as well. And so I hope that we'll be able to make some kind of material impact in our solidarity work, but also in this urgent time as well. And, we called it the Assata Shakur Brigade because when we were planning this, it was just after Assata died, freeing Cuba. And so it's kind of honoring that, as well as recognizing that material support and political education and honoring the revolution are kind of the character of the brigade.
I love that. Thank you. Is this the only brigade currently in the UK?
No, so there's the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, which I was going to mention is another great organization for people to be aware of. They've been organizing brigades for a long time, and they organize multiple brigades each year. The one that they do for May Day is focused on young trade unionists. And so the character of ours is broadening kind of in a different way. But they organize brigades, and there are a few other groups that also do them as well.
So we've had the national director of the Cuba Solidarity Camp. I think, Francisco Dominguez. I mean, we've had him on Empire Watch, and we're actually planning on interviewing him again on Global Majority for Peace soon. So I'm excited about that. But I suppose the thing is, and before we get to you, Ale, the thing is one of the things that you just mentioned, which is really important, I think, to understand for people, is just that Cuba must be part of this anti-imperialist resistance. We've got to sort of structure it with the understanding, we've got to further that understanding that we're all really in this together as anti-imperialists. And I mean that by the countries that are sovereign, which does include Iran, China, Russia, Vietnam, North Korea, and the divide and conquer strategy that the US is, or Western imperialism is pushing. It just works so well that a lot of people don't understand that. They still think it's like separate struggles. But Ale, how did you get involved in the Assata Shakur Brigade? And because you designed the logo even, did you? Oh no, sorry, you're muted again.
The website and some social media work, but the logo
Okay.
was always great, I think.
I love it. I love both the website and the logo. So good job, guys.
Cheers. I mean, how did I get involved? It was a dinner with comrades from Friends of Socialist China, and actually, I believe you were there as well, Liana.
What? I missed it.
Yeah, no, the Christmas dinner.
Oh, so Newpreet, you brought that. Did you bring it to the dinner fully formed, and then Ale joined at that point, or was it a discussion that I missed completely? I missed this completely, by the way. Go ahead.
You weren't upstairs. This is where it was had.
Yeah.
We were in the overflow. No,
The revolution is happening as you're in a different room.
Revolution is happening upstairs, basically.
It's always the overflow. That's where you have to be. You have to be late, actually. That's generally.
Yeah, that's the thing. I had just flown back from a delegation to Venezuela that morning, so I got there a bit late because I was sleeping and overslept. And yeah, just happened to I think it was like the second time meeting Nuvpreet. We were chatting, and yeah, it seemed like a fantastic idea, and I was interested right from the start. I mean, I've been wanting to go to Cuba for a while now. And yeah, when the occasion presented itself, I did not hesitate to say yes.
Amazing. Wow. Okay, cool. So that's how you got involved. And I mean, this is just a few months ago. So you managed to organize everything, get it started, raise the funds, and get going on this in a matter of like 3 or 4 months. Right? That's amazing.
Thank you. Well, we've got a group of really, really fantastic organizers in general, like strengths in a lot of different fields, and I guess we just work really well together. And it's been a pleasure as well. That's a great thing. Like, has it been stressful? Well, yeah, it's a lot of work, and obviously there's some stress to it, but we've not even gone yet, and I feel like I've gained so much from this already.
I mean, you've already achieved a lot without, having not gone yet, because there's a lot of awareness being spread, and you have some amazing events that you just had one event on Friday. I don't know if that was your first, but you have a few upcoming that's on your website. It's just a really sorry, oh my gosh, it's just a really good sort of community building type of event where people can meet each other, like-minded people, and do something, if they can't actually go themselves to Cuba. But we'll get into that more. We'll ask you about that a little bit more. I do, however, want to talk about some of maybe the downsides of this type of solidarity that you have to navigate through, right? I mean, like I think the recent brigade to Cuba, the Nostra America convoy, I think that was one trip, one brigade, which involved groups like Codepink, which you're part of, and many other. I think Katie Helper is someone I recognize, and I think Hassan Piker was also part of that brigade specifically. Delegates from that brigade reported being interrogated and having equipment confiscated by immigration authorities when they returned. They've described these actions as a deliberate strategy of intimidation. Can you talk about the risks you expect to face on your upcoming brigade and how you're going to prepare yourself for those challenges? And what, I guess, like also how you navigate through that in your own mentally preparing for that as well as emotionally. And also just like putting this in the situation of that you're both currently living here in London. So the political circumstance might be a little bit different from the US, or or not? I mean, what is your assessment of that, actually? Do you want to? Okay.
So the Nuestra America convoy was on its own, I think, a really incredible way to show people, particularly in the United States, that you can travel to Cuba. Because I think a lot of the intimidation and a lot of the the rules in place, so it is made to be difficult because you have to go on a particular license. You will get asked questions, and if you can potentially be interrogated, but that's all to stop you going to Cuba. Well, we don't have a similar situation in Britain and in Europe and other places in the world because lots of people go just to the resorts in Cuba here, and so we do have definitely a different character of our travel to Cuba itself, um, and that's a specific strategy, of course, of the U.S. And the reason is because the second you go to Cuba, you realize all the lies that the U.S. has been telling you are just completely false, and so there's a reason for that intimidation, and that is to stop you from going to Cuba, from talking to Cubans, and from actually experiencing the country that is kind of really a source of a lot of like psychological obsession. I think in the US, at least that's what I've felt a lot, is that there's like a particular nature of like this island 90 miles off the coast is like so dangerous and terrifying, which it actually is, because it is this like beacon of hope against empire. And so this convoy, there was the Codepink delegation had like 150 people on it, and they carried 6,500 pounds of aid with them, and it was an incredible way for people to go and learn about the island. But a lot of my colleagues in Codepink and a few others were interrogated on their way back, and some of them had their devices seized as well. And this is again a way to stop organizers from organizing these solidarity trips, because especially with this convoy, it got a lot of media attention. It pushed Cuba into the forefront for a lot of people, and because of the character of who went, so we had like Kneecap, Hassan Piker, as well as Tiago from the Gaza Samud flotilla, who has like a really big reach. For a lot of people, they have like really big audiences, and so they're telling their audiences about Cuba, which has already had, I think, really, really great impacts in bringing the Cuban struggle to more people and making those connections, like we were saying before. If you understand U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza, and you understand that you're in the struggle against genocide, then you're seeing that the same people that are doing that are also going to Cuba, taking aid, and recognizing what is being done there. So I think, and those are really dangerous comparisons to make, given the Palestine movement has grown so much. And so that context was, of course, an intimidation, but the nature that we have here is that, Britain is like a lackey state of the US, of empire, and so it is possible that states like Britain might enforce US rules, even if it isn't in domestic law. We saw that with Tiago, who was on the Nuestra America convoy. He was detained in Panama and Argentina, neither of which I'm aware of have any particular laws pertaining going to Cuba, but they did it on behalf of the United States. So while we're prepared and kind of understanding the scenario, the main thing that limits people and why they don't go to Cuba from other countries is you can't get an ESTA, the e-visa, to go to America if you've been to Cuba. And so for a lot of people, that is their concern, is that if you go to Cuba as a British citizen, you have to get a physical visa to go to the United States. And for people, that is actually a genuine concern. And so that is just one way that they stop people in Britain. But in general, yes, we're prepared if for anything to happen, but we think that this will be a really significant escalation in like British repression of just in general for people visiting Cuba, and we think it's very unlikely that anything will happen to us here. But we'll keep you updated, and if it is, then I think it will really mean that we have a lot more work to do in terms of Britain's role in enforcing a genocidal blockade on Cuba.
Kind of an interesting thing that you did say before is that the Cuban people are really asking for more solidarity from Britain. And I was just talking to Alex Gordon, from the General Secretary and newly elected General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain. I mean, he mentioned something about, like, you know, not to quote him incorrectly, but that the UK could be the weakest link in empire if it wanted to be. Now, I'm skeptical of this. However, we could be. There's so much potential here for us to do more in this sort of solidarity type of way. So for you, LA, I think you were mentioning a little bit about that, about the idea of, like, Cuba. How is it being seen here in Britain? Because both of you have mentioned, like, maybe not really being that affected by this anti-communist sentiment regarding Cuba. And it did sort of strike me that it might be your ages. So there could be a generational thing happening, but it could also be the UK. So for you, do you have any concerns for yourself? And also, can you sort of, like, give me an assessment of what you think about that, like the British anti-communist sentiment towards Cuba?
Anti-communist sentiment, I've seen it mostly with regards to China. Like, I guess with China being the rising power and in basically most metrics, the most powerful country in the world, except for military projection, because it operates on fundamentally different premises to the US. So I've noticed a lot of that. I noticed a lot of fabricated propaganda, about the so-called Uyghur genocide, so-called all the issues around Taiwan. And, like, I remember when the US kidnapped President Maduro and Cilia Flores, we started getting pundits saying that now that gave justification to Xi Jinping to go and kidnap the president of Taiwan, which is absurd. But yeah, I know it's absolutely ridiculous projection. But I'm genuinely struggling to find much anti-Cuba propaganda, or at least I guess it's getting swamped by the anti-Venezuela, the anti-Iran, the anti-China, the anti-Russia propaganda. In some shape or form, the anti-Sahel state propaganda, like we've seen anti-Burkina Faso propaganda. But Cuba really, apart from a few people online raving about how, but talking about how Cuba prosecutes gay people despite having the most progressive family law in the world, I've not really seen much here in Britain. And I guess it's just not been a huge topic of conversation in the last few years with everything that's been going on with China and Russia and Palestine. And yeah, so I'm not really, I'm really struggling to think of specific examples of anti-Cuba sentiment here in Britain, in my experience at least.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good. I mean, hopefully that means you guys are safe and everything will be fine and there'll be no hitches. But I mean, obviously, I'm curious what your experience will be like. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. I am jealous. However, just sort of to combat the sort of misinformation that might be circulating about Cuba right now, I think you're right to say that this may be mainly about the US pushing this propaganda really hard, especially with Marco Rubio, etc. But I do think, like we've talked about, the UK tends to follow in step with the US. So even if people aren't outwardly saying these things here in the UK, they might actually be thinking it. So I'm going to start like a few prompts to get us started. I'll read out a few prompts. And I think everyone in the audience, you can always put in your comments in the comments below this video. If you're not watching live, for example, put some sort of like the misinformation that you've heard, because we can always take that and sort of counter it. But I'm going to just say a few things, and then we're going to make these into social media carousels after this show, so people can actually take these and share them to anyone that might be incredibly misinformed. But this one I've heard a lot. Cuba is in crisis because socialism doesn't work. So we kind of debunked that, but how would you debunk that if somebody said that?
Can I take this one? It angers me. So
We need the passion.
Uh, I mean, Cuba is in crisis specifically because socialism does work. If the U.S. had not enacted the blockade from the very start of the revolution, if they hadn't done everything they could to destroy the revolution, we wouldn't be in this situation. I mean, they're doing the same that the U.S. is doing the same that the Tories have done here in the UK with the NHS, the same that the Lega Nord has done in Italy with the public health system. It's basically just sabotage, 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 remove resources and funding as much as possible, and then point a finger and say, oh, look, it doesn't work well, does it? We should probably privatize it. I mean, they're deliberately trying to destroy Cuba. They're trying to undermine its success and trying to hide what socialism means, what socialism can do. It's not working, by the way, because at every step of the way, Cuba's actually proving why socialism works. I mean, the fact that it's been able to survive the blockade, the fact that it's upping its solar input so much, the fact that it's receiving all this solidarity, it is a testament to how socialism actually works. And it's a tale as old as time. The US has been doing this for ages with every single country in history has ever attempted socialism or even just policies that were just not neoliberal. So, yeah, that is just factually wrong and very irritating.
We have a few more to irritate you. So stay tuned. But maybe Newford can take this one. The U.S. embargo doesn't really affect Cuba. Other countries can trade with them. I think this is very clearly about how does the U.S. embargo, which again is a misleading term, how does that actually work? I suppose that's the question.
Yeah, definitely. It is a misleading term. I think even blockade is a hard term because it doesn't encapsulate the reality of it. And I think so, since 1962, the United States has basically stopped all trade and economic activity with Cuba. And so, like a normal country, maybe that would just mean between the US and Cuba. No, it bans any trade with the US and Cuba outright, but the actual impacts of this is that it imposes secondary sanctions and tariffs and punitive measures against any country, as well as any organization, any individuals, company, or basically anybody in any form that doesn't comply with this. So that does trade with them. Um, and so I think what people don't get when you say like a US blockade is that it makes it seem like it's just between the US and Cuba. But when we're in a state of the world where the US is violently forging its hegemony, which I think is very very clear. While it does have the global reserve currency, while it has political, economic, and military power right now, then the blockade is basically enforced however they like it. Um, we've clearly seen this with the escalation to a total oil blockade as well. I think this has been maybe a better instance of where people have seen how the blockade operates. So, countries like Mexico, Venezuela, of course, took its own form, but any other states that or individuals that wanted to send oil were threatened with sanctions and tariffs and retaliation, basically from the United States for trading oil with Cuba, and that was, of course, what part of one of the motivations for the attack on Venezuela and the abduction of President Maduro was to stop the basically incredible cooperation between Venezuela and Cuba, which was that Venezuela provided oil to Cuba at favorable rates. In exchange, Cuba provided medical missions, it provided security, and it provided a lot of contributions beyond that. And that relationship had nothing to do with the United States. Why do they care about that at all? Um, but of course, that is exactly the enemy of the United States because they don't want to see any sovereignty of countries, particularly in an area that they deem to be theirs. So the blockade as a function, I think we have to see on many fronts. One is that yes, it's of all anything between the U.S. and Cuba, but also anything that has more than 10% of U.S. made items in it. So this means a lot of medicine actually, that Cuba then can't access because 10%, which is obviously a very small amount, are made, then Cuba cannot access that. And so this blockade is also means that, you know, if Cuba can't really get medicine, or it can't really get like basic essentials in the way that you think other countries can just by like shipping it or sending it. But that also is the reason why there are brigades like what we're doing now, where we're literally packing suitcases of things to then go and take to deliver to hospitals. But this is like a crisis situation where a country has to rely on basic, really, really basic things. Like we're talking about like syringes and needles, paracetamol, things for basic surgeries. They're reliant on, you know, either people sending shipping containers, which are very expensive, packing things in their suitcase, or going to different routes. And I think hopefully now this is something people are aware of with the oil blockade. This is what has been suffocating Cuba, and I think a lot of the propaganda that wants to say that Cuba's fine, it doesn't trade with other places, and it's part of the other propaganda point, which is like Cuba's fine, it's its own government and system that doesn't work. This is what is suffocating them, and I think there are a lot of parallels I think we can make with, you know, the U.S.-Israeli siege on Gaza and then the blockade on Cuba, and a lot of the same propaganda lines come out of that, which is that it's their own fault, it's their own like government, it's their own political system that is causing them to starve and be suffocated. Of course, we're in a slightly different situation where we can't take suitcases of aid to Palestinians in Gaza, but we can to Cuba, and of course, Cuba still extends a lot of solidarity to Palestine. So, yeah, I think the blockade point, and there's like so many declassified documents from the US. I think the most famous is the Mallory Memo from 1960, which basically outlines US blockade and why the US imposed this. And it says very directly, we want to make Cuban people suffer so they rise up against their government. It's clear this is still the policy all these years later. It hasn't worked and it will not work, but it's up to us to continue to support basically any actions to break the blockade that we can.
That's such a good point, that the playbook that they use, they recycle for every single country over and over. I mean, one of the things, so I'm going to position this at you, Ale, but I've heard this said about Gaza and Hamas all the time, which is basically like, well, in this case, it's the Cuba's government blocks humanitarian aid from getting to its people. So how do we respond to that? Oh, no, you're muted. I muted you. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess this one's it's slightly trickier to respond to, but I guess you could start by saying that there's literally no proof. So that's the starting point. It's pure conjecture. It's basically based on the fact that the Cuban state, plays a role in the distribution of aid, and I guess it's something that Western people cannot wrap their minds around. A state that does good things for its people. So I think it's a very Western notion that states can only be oppressive, that state power is, in an unqualified way, just bad, and we must not get state power. It's a kind of a culture of defeatism that we see in the West, the one that celebrates all failed revolutions and then criticizes every single revolution that succeeds. You see, it's the same accusation we see levied at China, at any actually existing socialist country, any country that's defied imperialism. And you mentioned Hamas, and what are they? A group that has successfully defended itself to some extent against Zionism, against Israeli genocide. So they must be depicted as monsters, as terrorists in the West. But there's no proof. There's absolutely no proof. And I guess the best way to tackle it is, well, think through it logically. What incentive does Cuba have to starve its own people? Like, logically speaking, why would they do that? They're struggling their way out of the capitalist world system. They're a country that really needs internal support, because it's not going to succeed without the support of the people. And they've managed to get the support of the people. So really, what would they stand to gain by starving the people?
I'm just imagining the 60,000 tons of rice from China. What would the Cuban government do with that? If it just hoarding the rice? Is it trying to sell the rice to another country? I mean, just ridiculous. But Yeah, it is still something that people say, which actually leads to the last one, which, I mean, both of you are free to just tackle this one, because it's just most Cubans want to leave because the system has failed. Which, I mean, we could say that about people here in the UK.
Can I take this one as well?
Go for it.
I mean, is it that different to the previous one when it comes to how it's constructed? Again, how can you prove it? How can you disprove it? That's the way that a lot of this propaganda works. They'll make statements that are really hard to empirically disprove. So then it's kind of a gotcha thing. But I mean, how do you measure intent in a vacuum, for starters? If you consider how and why people migrated from Cuba, they didn't do it for fun. They did it because they were struggling financially. Why were they struggling financially? Because of the blockade. So then you get accusations from people in the US who say that the Cuban system has failed, while they completely ignore the fact that it is the US that has made it not even fail, but struggle. And this is the way that, well, genuinely most migration happens in most countries in the world. That's the thing. And it's always, in most cases, it's the US that has its hand in it as well. But I guess the way you could dispute this is by using surveys. You look at the actual data, you look at polling, but then people will say, well, but if you use Cuban surveys, that's propaganda, as if using US surveys weren't propaganda. So we could mention, I think, one important episode that'll help understand what is going on here is what happened following the fall of the USSR when Cuba entered its so-called special period of economic struggle and stagnation, where it was forced to basically enhance its rationing system, was forced to develop its own industry somehow with a serious lack of trade and fuel and money. It was a period of massive struggle because they lost their biggest trading partner at the time. So what the Cuban government did was, instead of stopping people from leaving, which again is another point of propaganda that's pointed at the Cuban government, what they did was they actually negotiated migration agreements with the US, which would give Cubans legal pathways to move into the US, getting visas. But what happened was that yes, the US agreed, but then they reneged on the deal so many times, and they had a quota, I think, like 20,000 visas per year. And every year the US would basically reject most of them and only allow like 3,000 or 4,000. So then they could claim that the Cuban government didn't want to let their people leave. Isn't that what they said about Hamas? Isn't that what they said about the DPRK, North Korea? Isn't that what they say about all these anti-imperialist countries? They create the conditions for dissidents, or not even dissidents, for people to flee. Then they try and bribe them into giving testimonies, and this is how you get all these propaganda points. This is how you get Yeonmi Park with the DPRK. This is how you get the so-called Uyghur genocide in China. It's, as you said earlier, it's a common playbook every single time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so finally, let's just get to what should people do who are watching, who want to support Cuba in a concrete way, apart from share the social media stuff that we will be putting out there, for other people. But and we can actually make this into more social media. So yeah. So what can people who are watching do to support Cuba right now, tangibly? And what do you think are the most urgent needs on the island? What are the most effective ways to donate, contribute, or take action?
Yeah,
Do you want
I think this one we have to balance in lots of ways, because from everything that we've been talking about, clearly Cuba is a successful revolutionary society, that, if not for the blockade imposed on it, you can't even imagine how incredible this place could have been. Already, Cuba has saved like 12 million lives with its medical missions. It's provided so much support for anti-colonial movements. It's provided, safety for lots of revolutionaries in the United States and across the imperialist countries. so that it's like immeasurable to recognize the outward solidarity that Cuba has had to the world. I think that for us, we need to recognize that like it is our duty to provide solidarity to Cuba, and this has to be kind of twofold. One way is that we need to provide material support, of course, as we outlined. The blockade means that they cannot access the materials that are needed for life, and that's also a reason why people are struggling and suffering, and that's also why people are incentivized by all of the U.S. policies and propaganda that get them to like move to the U.S. I think just like what Ali mentioned, and also the favorable conditions given to Cubans who come to the U.S. Like the wet foot dry foot policy was literally designed to get Cubans to go and then share these testimonies, go to Miami and be part of this very anti-Cuban like movement there. So a lot of our support has to be political. It's like disproving a lot of these myths that we're told, like the ones we just went through, and how they kind of emerge also in Britain. With there are people who move from Cuba to Britain and then will share this propaganda because with social media and with kind of there's a lot of an explosion of social media now usage in Cuba, and a lot of that is heavily propagandized by the United States. The U.S. spends like millions of dollars each year on different news agencies, different apps directed at Cubans in Cuba, which is a big part of how they're trying to like build this kind of internal violent movement. So for us, we really have to emphasize that political education, and I think having this kind of public engagement about Cuba is really important, particularly given the current situation. Cuba is definitely more known now than it was even a few months ago, a few years ago, at least in I think within like organizers and younger people. I think what we have, and obviously it's a great thing, but it's kind of concern in Britain is a lot of people who were organizing in the anti-war movement in the 60s who were very aware of Cuba um, because of the time after the revolution, also potentially the 90s. But what we have now is maybe a new moment and a new movement for Cuba organizing, and I think a major thing people can do if they are interested in Cuba or they recognize that we need to be here in defense of Cuba is putting on any events you can, sharing literature. There's a host of materials that exist in English, sharing different media. There's lots of media organizations out there. Belly of the Beast, which produces some incredible documentaries, is a great one to share to counter the blockade, to raise awareness about the blockade, about the Cuban Revolution from a truthful perspective, and counter a lot of the propaganda in Britain that we are fed both through the education system, on social media. A lot of U.S. media is in Britain, and I think that the nature is that we really can't separate when we talk about like U.S. propaganda from what we have here, and so it's a lot about educating about the basic facts about Cuba, talking to people they know about it, even if they're just learning about it, like spend some time actually combating the misinformation or even just the lack of information we have about Cuba. Um, if they're seeing on the BBC that Cuba like shot some Miami terrorists on a boat, then maybe like try to go a bit deeper into that, because I think for a lot of people the only news they see on the BBC is of the failures of the Cuban Revolution. And instead we want really there to be another conversation which is about the successes, and it's really really easy to do. I think another thing that I'd mention is the Cuba Solidarity Campaign do a lot of political and lobbying work. Right now they have like over 100 MPs that they got to sign on to an early day motion to oppose the blockade, and this is really incredible. So I think we're in a moment where there's a lot of political activity as well. There are a few good MPs who are kind of pushing on Cuba right now, so I'd really implore people to get involved in like local Cuba Solidarity Campaign groups near them, do some work on lobbying, and then of course a major ask from Cuba is for supplies. Particularly, this is medical supplies and also helping with their basically movement to solar energy. And so that's a lot of the work that we're doing right now is raising funds to take those. But everybody can do this. you know, it's actually as simple as if you can book a flight and pack a suitcase with medicines, if you can buy some solar panels and go to Cuba, that's a great thing to do. And if people want help with getting connected with people to do that on their own with, you can also get in touch with us. But it is often as simple as that. And also tell people to go to Cuba, even as a tourist, go to the resorts. It's actually a really great way to get currency into the economy, as it is in any country, but specifically for Cuba. So I think what we want to emphasize is that Cuba needs like our support, yes, but it also needs our like revolutionary and principled support. You know, if we see any of the videos coming out of Cuba, like just a few days ago, there was this massive rally of like young people on like electric scooters and electric vehicles, mostly from China. It was organized by the Union of Young Communists, and they went through Havana to basically say, like, we're here, we oppose the blockade, and we are resilient. I get regular updates from some of my comrades in Cuba about the kind of innovations that they're doing to like combat the crisis right now. One of my comrades is like setting his house up to be solar powered because he has contacts internationally to help him to be able to do this, so that he can then host for the community a space that will have power even with a blackout, so he can have people's medicines in a refrigeration system, so you can provide food and water for them. It's like understanding that this is the reality of what Cuban people are doing in the face of a crisis, is moving to support their community, continuing revolutionary principles. And so for us, we want to extend our support to this with complete, committed resolve, not just charity, not just giving them things that they need and having this kind of tepid relation. It is everything we can do, basically, for Cuba is positive. And so, of course, like you mentioned, we have a lot of ways that you can directly contribute for events you can come to, or if you want to drop off donations that we can take when we go in a few weeks' time, you can go to the website, Assata Shakur Brigade. .org, or if you do have any interest in doing any organizing, you can email us and we can definitely get you connected. I think it's really needed right now for people to take on this struggle and recognize that like the Cuban Revolution has benefited the entire world and could continue to do more without the blockade. You know, they have a lung cancer vaccine, they're trialing vaccines to cure Alzheimer's. Like, it's truly a remarkable place that has already extended so much solidarity in it. It's like, you know, it's the duty of basically humanity for us to support Cuba. And so everything that people can do is very welcome.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we'll get all the links and we'll put them down below so anyone can access them. LA, do you want to add anything to that? Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll also add, because the Cuban struggle is part of the global anti-imperialist struggle, I think it's also good to get involved, maybe, I don't know, with the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, with Friends of Socialist China, support Iran, support Palestine, support Russia against NATO expansion. I think it's very important to connect these dots, and I think we cannot be single issue voters, as it were. We cannot just be like, we support Cuba, but then not support Venezuela, let Venezuela fall, let Mexico fall, and doom the Cuban people. We need to be principled, we need to be coherent and consistent. So yeah, I would emphasize what Nafrita has already said. Education. Study and education are fundamental, and we really need to be clear. I think a lot of British orgs have done a fantastic job in the last few years connecting these dots. So I think, yeah, a focus on the broader anti-imperialist struggle is fundamental.
Which is a perfect segue to mention that we are doing part 2 of this series next Monday at the same time with the Assata Shakur Brigade, talking more about basically education around Cuba, how it more of a deep dive into the history of Cuba, the revolution, the revolutionary history of Cuba, why it's significant to the anti-imperialist cause. You know, we'll get into it a little bit deeper next week. But I think, just to end this episode, I really appreciate both of you coming on. And I think one of my big takeaways here is that, yes, we're suggesting donations, we're suggesting aid, we're suggesting solidarity in this moment, but it's not about charity. It's not about, this is different. This is solidarity because we're maybe not us specifically personally, but we're part of the system that is causing this blockade, right? The US imperialist system, which the UK is part of. So it is our responsibility to be in solidarity because we can't stop our government. So we're still trying, but that's the task, right? So thank you so much for joining me, and thank you everyone who's watching for watching. Please share this link. We will be making social media. We'll try to create more awareness around this episode and this project of yours, this brigade of yours. So thank you everyone, and thank you Nufrit and Ale. Any last words saying goodbye?
Thank you so much for having us. It was great, and yeah, had a great time.
Okay, cool. Oh, and thank you, Atalal. I just got a comment in our chat box. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Go ahead, Nufrit. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'm just gonna say thank you so much for hosting this, and I think it's exactly kind of what you said, like having things like this to actually talk about Cuba is so important. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys so much. Okay, cool. Thank you everyone, and we'll see you guys next week. But thank you, Nufrit and Ale. Okay, I'm gonna end the stream. Bye everyone. See you guys next week.